exit the meeting. So Juliana, if you want to go ahead and start the recording, Juliana, now that would be great. The recording will go through the whole meeting. And at the end, we're going to have questions and answers. And so if you ask questions at the end, it will be on the recording. So related to that, you're going to find a link in the chat to the slides that we will be presenting, so you can follow along. You will also find yourself muted and unable to unmute. So if things come up during the presentation, which will be, it's going to be 40, 50 minutes, maybe a little bit longer. If you have a question that pops into your head in the beginning, put it in the chat for record purposes, and we'll circle back to it at the end. If you have a technical issue, definitely put that in the chat. We do have somebody in the room monitoring that, and so if it requires immediate action, we'll pause the meeting to address technical questions like, can you hear us? Did you miss a slide? If it's a question about the substance of this, then that person will respond, acknowledging that the question's been seen, and we will come back to it at the end of the meeting. At the end of the meeting, we will be unmuting people if they would like to ask their question verbally, so we'll go over that at the end, but we'll allow you to raise your hands and unmute you so you can speak if you would like. And the recording will be posted hopefully tomorrow on the department's YouTube page, but certainly by Monday. Next Thursday, January 22nd at 6 o'clock, 6 to 8 Mountain Time, we will have a virtual Q&A session. We will not do the presentation again, but it will be entirely question and answer. So that gives you a chance to go watch the recording, go look at the slides, and if you come to that meeting with questions, we'll deal with them there. And as we will discuss later, we are more than happy to meet one-on-one or with any particular groups or companies that want to meet if they want to have private discussions, because do remember, anything you ask in here will be heard by everybody in the meeting. So if you want to ask something that you don't want everybody else to know, our contact information is going to come up in a couple of slides, and you can email one of us and we'll set that up. Did I forget anything? I think that's good for logistics. So I'm going to give it back to Cindy.
Okay. Are we sharing the slides? Okay, great. So I am looking at the overview. The agenda for today is listed on the overview. And really our goal for today is to just introduce you to the process that NMED has implemented to analyze what our current physical position is and what's going to be required to keep our program going. We'll talk in general about funding and why we need a fees increase, and that will include benefits for both industry and the general public. We'll also give an overview of the changes we propose to make in both Part 71 and Part 75. And we'll give some more information on what to expect coming up. So there will be a timeline. At the end, we should have sufficient time for some questions. We will do our best to provide answers to as many questions as possible. So let's get started. Next slide, please. It's important to know the structure of what's happening with the AIR program. So we are part of the Environmental Protection Division, the Air Quality Bureau is. Our director is Michelle Miano, and she has been intimately involved with our analysis and how we're moving forward. As I said before, I'm Cindy Hollenberg. I'm the Air Quality Bureau Chief. Brian Polgar is the Planning Section Chief, and he has an entire team of people that have been working to do the appropriate analysis to determine what an appropriate fee structure will be. And that's what we're proposing to the board on March 23rd. We also have a Compliance and Enforcement Division. The Compliance and Enforcement Division itself takes care of the entire agency, and Bruce Basil is its director. Brett Anderson, however, is the Environmental Protection, Compliance and Enforcement Bureau Chief. And so part of his duty is to oversee the compliance and enforcement part of the AIR program. So that's a change that has happened recently. Historically, the AIR program was housed just in the Air Quality Bureau. It was part of the Environmental Protection Division. But as of July 1st, 2025, all of the NMED compliance and enforcement activities, staff actions, and organization transferred to the Compliance and Enforcement Division. So all non-CNE portions of Air Quality Bureau remained in the Environmental Protection Division, but air quality compliance and enforcement staff are now one section of the Environmental Protection, Compliance and Enforcement Bureau. We refer to that as EPSEB sometimes because it's kind of hard to say. Next slide, please. So funding for the air quality regulatory activities. There are 120 different funding sources in the agency. And this rulemaking proposal really only pertains to the fee revenue funds for air quality program activities. Under Federal Clean Air Act, Section 502B and Regulation 40 CFR, Section 70.9, states that operate an EPA-approved Title V program are required to assess fees that are sufficient to cover all reasonable costs of developing, administering, and enforcing the operating permit program. The program's allowable costs include, but are not limited to, things like labor, materials, equipment, training, technical assistance, compliance inspections, monitoring, program development, public hearings, and other administrative or operational activities. In addition to that, the Air Quality Control Act, Section 74-2-7, lists in broad terms the activities fee schedules must cover. It authorizes the EIB to adopt fee schedules sufficient to cover the reasonable costs of reviewing and acting upon any application for permits, implementing and enforcing permit conditions, and maintaining and administering the air quality in compliance with federal requirements. The Air Quality Control Act, Section 74-2-15, establishes the State Air Quality Permit Fund, and it specifies the purposes for which revenues deposited into the fund may be used. Under this provision, permit and emissions fees revenues are deposited into the State Air Quality Permit Fund, and they may be used to support a range of air quality program activities, including reviewing and acting upon permit applications, implementing and enforcing permit conditions, emissions and ambient air monitoring, developing regulations and guidance, preparing emissions inventories, conducting modeling and technical analyses, and administering air quality programs in compliance with federal and state requirements. So this statutory framework demonstrates that permit and emissions fees support not only permitting functions, but also broader air quality program responsibilities necessary to implement the Air Quality Control Act and the Clean Air Act. Every year, NMED does apply for federal grants, which offset a small portion of these costs. It's important to note that penalties collected for violations go directly to the state general fund. And because of the statutes just described, the air quality program receives a very small amount of general fund money. NMED experiences significant oversight of its spending on a continual basis, and that's through the New Mexico Department of Finance, as well as internal oversight from the New Mexico Environment Department's Administrative Services Division. Starting March 23rd, we will be asking the EIB to approve proposed changes to our 2 state rules that outline the fee structure. It is important to distinguish the rulemaking process to increase fees for air program activities from the annual agency state budgeting and oversight process. Too often, these get mixed up, and they are very separate processes. So what this slide outlines is at a high level what that separate annual agency state budgeting process looks like. I'd like to note that it is a forward-looking process, the nature of the annual process for the next fiscal year. We prepare a proposed budget well over a year in advance. We sometimes have the ability for access to available funds to address evolving program needs after the operating budget has been finalized. That process is known as a budget adjustment. And if those instances arise, NMED works with other government partners, including the Department of Finance and Administration, and sometimes the Legislative Finance Committee on those items. For the air regulatory program specifically, the fee revenue that NMED collects from its regulatory fee schedule at Part 71 and Part 75 is the basis on which NMED can make decisions for its budget recommendations each annual cycle. The Department of Finance also plays a key oversight role of NMED's fund solvency. So NMED must conform to the entirety of the procurement code, and the Department of Finance maintains oversight for NMED budget spending along with Administrative Services Division oversight within the agency. Industry may be able to fund their activities by taking out debt. Government agencies are not allowed to do that, so we have to have the funding before we can spend. Budget decisions are made at various levels by the state. The EIB authority does not extend to budget decisions, only to our ability to collect sufficient funds to run our program. So, why are current fees insufficient to cover the cost of the programs? On the Title V side, it's mainly because revenues have decreased significantly due to declining allowable emissions in recent years. This is going to be shown graphically later in the presentation, and it is great, but it does mean that we have reduced funds from those fees. For the construction permit program, it's largely due to significant growth in the oil and gas development, which has led to significant increase in permitting actions. We will be looking at that more later, and more regulated facilities that the Bureau has to oversee. Staffing levels have not kept up with the increasing workload, and that will be shown graphically later on in the presentation also. Other factors also add to this. For example, NOI facilities pay a nominal fee to cover the analysis for determination that the facility qualifies under our Notice of Intent program. However, NOI review actually typically takes around the same amount of time and effort as a GCP due to all of the analysis that's required. Further, NOIs pay no annual fees, even though those facilities require ongoing efforts by the AIR program, including complaint response sometimes, investigations, verifications of facilities, emissions inventory submissions, and evaluation. In other words, the NOI filing fee is insufficient to cover the cost of this part of our program. There's been confusion in the past that the fees we charge are only to be used for permitting. This is absolutely not true. According to state statute and federal law, fees must cover the direct and indirect costs of the entire program. Program cannot function without the two revenue funds covering all the costs listed here. So a reminder, Section 74-2-15 of the New Mexico State statutory
Statutes annotated.
annotated. Thank you. Sorry about that. Money in the state air quality permit fund is appropriated to the department for the purpose of paying the reasonable costs of reviewing and acting upon application for a permit. If the owner or operator receives a permit, implementing and enforcing the terms and conditions of such permit not including any court costs or other costs associated with any enforcement action, emissions and ambient monitoring, preparing generally applicable regulations or guidance, modeling, analysis, and demonstrations, and preparing inventories and tracking emissions. Currently, federal grants pay for approximately 60% of the monitoring and data quality analysis undertaken by the state. Everything else is paid for by permit and emissions fees. As you can see, most of our program is funded by revenue from Parts 71 and 75. Federal and state law requires this, as we've just learned. These are the main areas of our program that must be covered according to state and federal law, as well as by EPA guidance. We do get typically annual grants that pay for approximately 60% of our monitoring and data quality assurance program. This has been accounted for in the financial analysis to determine an adequate fee schedule for both Title V funds and NSR funds. That said, the federal landscape has changed, and this is a cost the two revenue funds may have to cover in the future. We hope not, and our projections do not include a loss of federal funds. We are doing everything we can to ensure that funding continues for our state. One goal we have for the future is to expand our grants to help alleviate costs, but we do not yet have enough funds to do this. So the current financial picture. It's important to note that the state fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. So we're not on a calendar year, and that always plays a role in how we have to deal with budgeting. The AIR program is building capacity to implement a larger portion of its mission. Following previous restrictions on spending our funds for the program, this administration has supported our efforts to expand our activities and staffing to meet program objectives as much as possible. But more is needed, as will be discussed more later in this presentation. Because of state budgeting rules, operating budgets may not exceed current fund balances plus expected revenue. Our program is already constrained because of this fiscally responsible policy. Unlike industry, as I said before, we can't go into debt to fund our program. We have to have the funds before we can spend the funds. What about cutting costs? Cutting costs would have negative consequences for the environment, the public, and even industry. These are only a few of the foreseeable consequences of needing to cut services if our funding needs are not met by an increase in fees. We are actively adjusting our grant applications to fall within new guidelines that restrict our programs and the language we use to describe our program. We hope we do not get to the point of reducing our work staff by attrition. We've experienced this in the past, and it puts us behind the milestones we need to meet in order to achieve our goals. We want to increase our monitoring capabilities, whether it's through the EPA-approved network or not. If we can't do that, we don't have the granular data we actually need to make informed decisions about air quality in the state. One of our top priorities is to respond to community concerns, so inadequate funding puts our mission at risk. We've already experienced enough delays in permitting. Sufficient funding is the only way we can hope to keep meeting deadlines. Outreach and collaboration take time, organization, and sometimes travel. It is an expense we know pays off, so our hope is that we do not have to cut back anymore on these types of efforts. NMED and the AIR program specifically get numerous complaints, reports, and comments from individuals, communities, and organizations. NMED shares many of these concerns. They're mostly related to environmental impacts, but also we have to recognize that many of these concerns are due to resource shortages. We take our mission seriously, and that mission is the Air Quality Bureau of the New Mexico Environment Department protects the public health, of New Mexicans and the natural beauty of the state by preventing the deterioration of air quality. We can't do that without additional resources. We promulgated the ozone precursor rule to address ozone levels, and we have initiated regional photochemical modeling to provide us more information on how we should proceed in the future to further address those levels. We are working with other states and consultants to understand and take proactive measures to protect air quality from an increase in data centers. We hope in the future to complete regional modeling that will include cumulative impacts. We will be looking at how to collect more granular data on greenhouse gas emissions for future rulemakings. We prioritize our inspections for facilities based on their potential for violating and their history. This is the best we can do with the limited staff we have, and we don't feel it's efficient or appropriate to have contractors conduct inspections for us. We're currently also working toward having a mobile lab that can be deployed for community concerns. And beyond that, we are starting a process, which often takes years to complete, to add monitors to our EPA-approved network. And we have responded to individual community requests for additional monitoring also. So for example, we've placed VTEX monitors in Carlsbad, and we've had dust monitoring in Galisteo. We do hear you, and we are trying our best to meet the demands of the public, which in many ways align with our own goals. We can't do it without increased funding, and that's why we're here today. So everything listed here has been voiced by industry, sometimes by multiple entities. Most, if not all, of these concerns are shared by NMED, and that is why we're asking for increased fees. Also, to introduce a bit of humor, we should note that some permitted facilities think they shouldn't have to pay fees at all. We do hear you, industry, just like we hear the general public. And we are doing everything we can to meet our obligations. We do work to issue permits as expeditiously as possible. We have trainings for new and existing staff to try to reduce inconsistencies. Our applications, we need those to provide us the data we need to analyze permit and NOI proposals. We've recently doubled the contracted staff to approve Part 50 alternative plans. We're currently planning an outreach effort to discuss Part 50 and other oil and gas related plans. We're working to reduce the backlog of enforcement actions. And we know that some regulations are outdated, and we plan to work to appropriately revise those outdated rules. And we would love to have all communications be electronic, but that will take new technology and even some regulatory changes. If we don't increase our fees, these requests may remain unfulfilled, and further consequences, as described later in this presentation, may ensue. NMED has had a team of planning analysts working over the last several months, along with guidance and help from our financial staff in the Administrative Services Division and with senior leadership to analyze the appropriate fee structure that is fair and covers all of the costs required to be covered by fee revenues. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Brian Polgar, our planning section chief, who will describe the factors and conclusions of this analysis.
Thank you, Cindy. That's going to be a hard act to follow, but we'll see what I can do here. So I'm going to get into some technical stuff, some numbers, but before I do that, the 5-year or the analysis that Cindy just mentioned and has mentioned a couple times, I just want to share. We're not going to go into a lot of detail here on that today. That will be included in our NOI and testimony that we put out with exhibits, so we are going to present that information. But at a high level, it's a 5-year analysis of projected costs and projected revenues, assuming we get the fee increase. So we've done a revenue projection that incorporates the fee increases, hopefully. And we use that to come up with a fee schedule and proposal that covers those costs. And so we've done a lot of work to ensure that we will be covered appropriately moving forward. So to go a little bit more into the why, so the bar graph you're looking at here is permitting actions. So this is different than permitted facilities. We have this coded by color. A couple of important ones are the green and the orange. The green is our NOIs, the orange is our GCP related oil and gases. So Eric, if you can click one. So the total permitting actions have gone up 126% since 2012. Again, this is permitting actions, so this does include things like administrative permit revisions, which we actually don't even charge fees for. It's not permitted facilities, and not all of these are new permits. So if you can click again, it'll show us the oil and gas related GCPs specifically have gone up basically 2,100%. The GCP oil and gas was started in 2018, so that's where you see the biggest growth in the orange there is from 2018 forward. But the orange goes back previously, prior to the GCP oil and gas, we did issue some other GCPs that were oil and gas specific. And so the 2,100% is for all of the oil and gas related GCPs, not just the GCP oil and gas permit, if that makes sense. And then the green is the NOIs, and you can see pretty significant amounts of NOI applications and modifications that do come in. So now this slide, we're actually going to talk about regulated facilities with the caveat that this does not include well sites. And no one should take that to mean that we don't regulate well sites, because we do, especially now under Part 50, regulate some well sites, or most well sites. So this is going to be our NOIs, our minor source, and our major source. And so blue is NOI, orange is minor source, green is major source. And Eric, if you want to click one here. So the NOI facilities have gone up almost 250% over the 12 years. A lot of this is in oil and gas, but there are other industries that get the notice of intent. When a notice of intent comes in, they pay the filing fee historically, which has been $500. However, they're a major source of our emissions in the state. So that leads to a lot of costs, as some of this Cindy mentioned, in planning and monitoring. So NOIs are, and compliance, of course, because they are subject to regulations, including the NOI regulation, which requires that they follow the things they said that they would do, and they don't make changes. And so there's compliance work that has to happen. So they have a lot of costs with NOIs. We'll talk a little bit more about that later too, but Eric, if you can click again, we'll show the percentage for the minor sources. So this would be NSR permits and GCP, general construction permits. Those facilities that emit basically between 25 tons and 100 tons. Again, we see a massive over 200% in the count of the minor sources, which is the orange. Specifically with a pretty big increase in the last 6 or so years, which has really increased the compliance requirements. I used to work in compliance and enforcement, so I know some of this. We are behind on minor source inspections and audits. We are behind on major source inspections and audits, and we are barely doing NOI compliance work, and we should be doing all of that. A lot of that, or all of that, is due to resource constraints. And then if you want to click again, Eric, the percentage of major sources, which is the green bar, has gone down slightly over the years, 8%, although primarily due to the count being 140 in 2012, and then it's dropped and actually been relatively flat since that time for the number of facilities. And we will talk about this on a later slide. The number of major sources is different than the emissions. And in the major source, the Title V program, our revenues come from the allowable emissions. And so, Eric, if you can go forward. A lot of this growth in our permitted facility count is due to oil and gas development. So this particular slide is the Permian, which is the southeast corner of New Mexico. It's one of the, or is maybe the largest oil and gas producing basin in the world right now. The oil and gas production in this basin has skyrocketed over the last few years, due to fracking and some other technologies. But this looks at 2009 versus 2024. This does not even show NOIs. So all you're seeing right here are the red dots are our minor sources and the blue dots are our major sources. So NOIs are not on here. They would crowd this even more if they were. But you can see a significant increase in the facilities that are getting permits in the Permian Basin. And not every dot you see on this screen is oil and gas, but a lot of it is. And Eric, if you can click again. So while we've had this and also had a large increase in regulatory complexity, meaning the regs that have come out at the state and federal level there have been more of them and they've been more complex. We've also had more facilities. And so we've had more inspections we have to do and our emissions have gone up. So we have more planning and monitoring work. Meanwhile, this is our picture of funded positions in the air programs from 2012 through 2025. So a few things to note here. One is that these are based on org charts that we pulled from January to February of each year. So roughly the start of each calendar year. The small purple line at the top is the bureau chief each year. So that's just one, obviously. The others are color coded according to the legend there. And so you can see that the staffing for funded positions really has been flat up until about the middle of 2023, and that starts to show up in the 2024 graph. This does also exclude our legal and our financial support staff, who are also funded from our permit fees. And so this isn't even all of the positions we fund. We couldn't put them on this graph because we did not have that information consistently back through time. But I can tell you that right now we are paying for 4 financial staff and 3 air attorneys also out of the permit funds. And I can also tell you that we are currently at about 121 positions, excluding those legal and financial positions. So we've had even more growth in the last year. And so all of that growth in labor has helped us to start to do more. It's not enough, and it's come with some pretty significant increases in costs, part of which are reflected in the earlier slide, showing that we are spending more this year than we projected bringing in revenue for both of these funds. And I hopefully don't have to say that that's not sustainable. We can't keep doing that. And so we definitely need our fees increased, and we need them quickly to support the expansion that's already occurred, plus the expansion that we continue to need moving forward. All right, next slide, please. So this one, there's a lot on this one, but I think this is an important thing to get across here. So this is going to talk only about Title V for the major sources. So this goes back to those 125 to 130 facilities or so. The orange lines here are the number of facilities. That's your right-hand axis that jumps in 30s from 0 to 150. So you can see over time, it is relatively flat. It's a slight decrease as shown before, but relatively flat. Meanwhile, the blue line is our allowable Title V emissions. That's what we collect revenue on. And that's it. Title V sources don't pay NSR annual fees. They don't pay any other fees. They only pay fees based on that blue line. They do pay for excess emissions, but the reality is that's a pretty minor cut of the pie. So big point here is the emissions have gone down, but the facility count really hasn't. So we have the same number of facilities to inspect. We have the same number of facilities submitting permitting applications. And we still have to do all the same planning, monitoring work that we've had to do historically. And so now we're going to add some information. Remember, the facility's been the same, but we're going to take it off to dive into the funds a little bit here. So on this particular graph, you've got orange and purple lines. Orange are the actual dollars that we collected in each year for the billable emissions. the purple line and adjust that for inflation so that you get a look at the current dollars and what it would look like from the past. Eric, if you could click it again, we'll give you the tons for each particular year if you have interest in that. But obviously those are downward trending lines. You might notice a couple of big bumps, which we're going to talk about. So Eric, click one more time. The first big bump is 2018 downward. Two significant things for our Title V program happened in this year from the revenue perspective. One is TSP, total suspended particulate, and I'm going to talk about that later. But for right now, the important thing to note is the standards were repealed then, which changed the allowable emissions on our Title V permits. And basically, we've collected no revenue for total suspended particulate, which is dust, basically, and some other things. But so people have still been admitting it. There's still dust limits on people's permits, but we have not been able to collect any revenue or any allowable particulate matter emissions since this time. That's part of the big drop there. The other part is the SJGS, and I thought I would fumble it, but I didn't fumble it. Yes, the San Juan Generating Station, the coal burning power plant that is now closed from the northwest area of the state. Their first two units were retired in this year, which led to a drop in the allowable emissions. And then Eric will show you when he clicks here that the next big drop is 2022 when the other two units at San Juan were retired. That permit has been canceled. That plant is being deconstructed. There is another coal-fired plant in New Mexico, but the state does not regulate that, and we do not collect revenue from that plant, that being the plant in the Navajo Nation. So one more click here to show you that we're going to add the actual dollar amounts here. And so you can see that using inflation-adjusted dollars since 2012, we have experienced a 45% decrease in the revenue from over 7 million to just under $4 million of revenue into our Title V fund. Not nearly enough to support even our current costs, much less the projected future costs. So I know that was a lot, thank you, and we're going to go to the next one. So no more graphs, we'll go to some text here. Some of this stuff Cindy's already said. And, you know, I just think that why do we need the fee increases? Well, we really do need to continue to increase our staff levels, our resources levels to catch up with and keep pace with the anticipated higher workloads moving forward. There's a number of reasons for that. We also want to reiterate, as has been said, that these fees don't just cover the permitting program. They don't just cover the time or the cost to issue permits. They have to cover everything. Indirect costs, which we briefly touched on before, like rents and postage, and you know, there's endless costs, and they almost all of them are covered by our permit and emission fees. It would allow us more financial resources. We could offer, hope for some better salaries. We've already had some salary increases recently, which increase costs, but we'd like to continue that to improve recruitment and retention. And I've mentioned the increased complexity. And I will just touch on the contractors. As some operators who are in the room know, we have been using some contractors for permitting work and some other work. We've done that to try to get ahead of some of this and address some of the issues that we're having, because we just don't have the staff to do what we need to do. And so if you can go forward one more there. Another few bullets here, it's kind of touched on by Cindy, but there is a change at the federal level, and I think it would not be fair of us to not talk about it at least. While we assumed that the federal funding would continue for our monitoring positions, this is kind of a different point here, which is that if you're paying attention to the federal situation, then you know that the current administration is really pushing a deregulatory push to pull and cancel standards and loosen standards and make things not as stringent. We expect that to increase our work because we are not going to allow the air quality in New Mexico to deteriorate as a result of that, which means that we will likely be doing more work. And then sort of a little bit of the specific stuff. So there's a realization from our analysis that the current construction permit points schedule really is not adequate to cover the costs that are associated with the facilities, with the modeling reviews, and then specifically with the application reviews for NOIs and the GCP oil and gas. Do want to just clarify that we don't specifically look at things and say, you know, this permit took 9 hours, and so we're going to charge $500 an hour, and that's how we get to our review fees. It doesn't quite work like that. It's a bigger picture. We're getting funds from multiple sources to get into our pots, but the current schedule in the construction permit program is not adequate. Then for the NOIs, we've touched on this a couple of times, but the ongoing costs that are associated with those facilities, over the years, we've had no really, well, there's not a really, we have not collected any ongoing revenue for NOIs. The $500 filing fee is not even close to adequate to address the application itself, much less the ongoing costs from those facilities. So we've, you know, made an effort, and you're going to see it in a couple of slides here, or if you've seen our submission to the board already, you know there's some differences from last year. We've tried to really collect the funds across the whole program rather than targeting any particular permit or action. We'll talk more about that in a second, but we just talked about Title V, but again, revenue's gone down because emissions have gone down, but the workload really has not gone down. So we've lost revenue, but really have not lost workload, and possibly even had increased workload because of complexity. And then just kind of to pat ourselves on the back and just say, we really want to keep up the work we've been doing. There's a list of things there that we're currently already working on, that have increased cost across the board. And really the only one I'm going to mention particularly is within the last 18 months, we've created and filled 35 new air program positions, which has helped, but has not been enough. And so, you know, there's no doubt that we can continue to fill positions if we can get them funded. All right, next slide. So this one, Cindy, I think briefly talked about this. We're gonna, you know, our analysis will show that the proposed fees are covering the cost, the reasonable cost of our program. We feel very solidly about that. And we also feel that there's collateral benefits for industry and the public. This slide, we're going to talk about industry benefits. Some of this, again, Cindy mentioned, but in general, we think that there's a lot of benefits for industry through us being able to meet our mission, improve our monitoring, you know, improve the ability to help communicate with people about compliance and enforcement questions, audits, which if you deal with audits, or the alternative monitoring plans for Part 50, you might have experienced some delays. There's been enforcement delays. We want all of this to end, and we believe it can if we can get the fee increases. And some of these things are of a lot of benefit. You know, I'm not going to go into the details of the audits, but if there's industry folks on the call that have used them, they know that they're a benefit to them. And so we feel like we'd be able to do those a lot better. Let me look at the next slide, please, Eric. So the next slide is going to be the public. So some of these maybe seem obvious, I guess, but you know, increased monitoring, increased compliance and enforcement capacity really can benefit the public and the air quality, because the more that we can do these things, the more data we can get from monitoring, the more boots we can put on the ground to do inspections, the quicker we can get through enforcement. We really do think that will lead to an overall increase in air quality, and the public specifically would see some great benefits from this, including some of the things listed here, including more comprehensive complaint responses and an ability to hopefully respond more quickly and comprehensively to requests about monitoring and air quality. They also benefit from the other things, the increased planning, better rules that can help protect air quality, updating some of our outdated rules. All of the things that we've mentioned, we think come with a lot of collateral benefits for industry and the public. And now we're going to go to the sort of broad overview of the revisions to these rules. And I will note there are red lines, what we call red line versions of these rules, as well as the proposed new rules are on the EIB's docket already. The red line would show you exactly what we are striking from the old rule and including in the new rule, if you want to look at that. From a high level, this is the 20.2.71, which is our emission fee operating permit rule, otherwise known as Title V or major source. So again, these facilities, these operators pay a per ton fee based on allowable emissions. There are a couple of things we're doing to this rule. I'm going to talk about mercury first because it's more straightforward. The primary source of mercury, airborne mercury emissions is coal burning. And with the closure of the San Juan generating station, we do not have major source mercury emissions anymore. So we're going to remove everything about mercury. It has its own fee structure currently, which we're going to remove, and we're going to remove it from the definition of fee pollutants. That one's pretty straightforward. The PM, the particulate, total suspended particulate matter in the PM 10 and 2.5, which I said we would talk about later, now is later. And so this, without going into the details, the total suspended particulate is how we used to regulate this substance, and it's how we used to collect emissions in this program. In 2017, the TSP standard was repealed. TSP was removed from Title V permits, so there were no longer allowable TSP emissions on those permits. It did not mean that the particulate matter went away. It did not mean there wasn't dust. It wasn't like suddenly the whole major source universe isn't emitting any particulate. Instead of TSP, they started having PM10 and PM 2.5 allowable limits on their permits. Unfortunately, and due to our own oversight, we did not update the billing immediately. And as a result of that, we have not collected any fees for TSP or PM10 or PM 2.5 since 2018. And you can see the numbers there, it's pretty significant. Last 5 years, average about 350,000. If you put that over the 7 years that we haven't collected this revenue, you're looking at 2.5 million of lost revenue in our Title V program. So it's a significant chunk of money and it needs to be fixed. And that's really all this is. We're fixing our own oversight from the past. We are aware that it will change the look of some people's bills, but we would encourage those people to look at their bills from 2016 before they jump to too many conclusions, because they really should have been paying for their particulate emissions all along. All right, one more slide, Eric, on 71's changes. And so there's going to be another table later that presents all of the numbers. So I'm not going to go too far into the numbers, but obviously the big thing in 71 is the per ton fee. It is going to 85. We are proposing that it go to $85 a ton. All of the current inflation adjusted amounts that you see on this slide, the next slide, or the table are the brand new adjustments that just occurred on January 1. So these are the inflation adjusted amounts that will be used on the billing that we're starting now. The HAPS reset, this is not a change. This is just us updating the language and resetting the baseline to what this year's calculated HAP amount already is. And I'm not going to say anything else really about HAPS. We'll see if there's questions on this, but I will say that we have not billed for HAPS in the Title V program for a while at this point, and we don't really expect to bill for HAPS. So this is really just sort of an administrative, cleaning up thing. I'm happy to share more offline or in the questions if it really is a concern, but we really have not collected this fee for a while. We are also proposing to reduce the cap in the Title V program from 6,000 tons to 3,000 tons per year per pollutant. So this means if the facility emits 4,500 tons of NOx, NOx, in a Title V permit, that's their allowable emissions, they will only be charged for 3,000 tons. The main focus here was to bring a little bit of more equal treatment and ensure that no single facility was paying more than 5% of our total Title V revenue. And so that's a lowering of that fee. And then to circle back to dust and particulate, just to be clear, no one will be charged for both. The reality is almost everyone will be charged for PM10 because PM10 includes PM2.5, 10 microns or less, so it has to do with the diameter of the particles. But if you're 10 microns or less, that's obviously going to include the 2.5. So for most operators, you'll be billed on your PM10 amounts. You will not be billed for both. Some other administrative changes, we're clarifying electronic payment. We're really trying to move towards electronic payment for this. We are adding some late fee provisions and administrative compliance cost provisions. Late fees are generally not an issue in this particular program, the Title V program. We felt it was important to add because, as you're going to see, we're adding them to the other program, the construction permit program. But for the Title V program, because, and again, if there's operators of major sources on the call, they'll know this. These invoices go out in the spring and are due June 1st, which is incredibly late in the fiscal year for that payment to come in. And so we really just wanted to add a codified late fee to encourage people to pay on time, which most of you are, so thank you. So let's look at the next slide. We're going to go to 20.2.75, which is we call it throughout this presentation, the construction permit program, but the fees in this rule apply really to both 20.2.72, which is our NSR construction permit rule, and 73, which is our NOI rule. So that is sort of our construction permit program world. As has been touched on briefly, we are eliminating the filing fee for NOIs. The filing fee for NSRs will stay, but that's a filing fee that's not even an increased cost. It's just kind of a deposit. We are eliminating that for the NOIs, and we are instituting an application review fee, which will be based on 10 points on the schedule. That's done to align it more with the GCP 2, 3s, and 5s. Cindy did touch on this earlier. An NOI, according to some of the information and data we have from our own folks, actually takes a little bit more time than a GCP 2, 3, and 5 to review during the application process. And so 10 points is currently what all GCPs are. And so we're making NOI application reviews be 10 points also. We are taking the GCP oil and gas from 10 to 30, which, if you remember last year, this is a change. We proposed 50 points last year for the GCP oil and gas. We are proposing 30, which is more in line with the same analysis about the time spent, and helps again to spread the cost recovery out beyond those people that hold a GCP oil and gas registration, as it should be. NOIs, notices of intent, do have ongoing costs. They have not nearly been contributing into the fund what it's cost us to deal with them. And so we really do believe that those two changes in particular make things a lot more equitable across the program to get our costs back. As well as we're proposing to increase the cost per point. 539 is what the January 1 number is. We're proposing that it go to 585. And I will take this chance to note, hopefully it's obvious, but this year's billing is going to go out under the current, these rules aren't passed, so we can't bill on these yet. So if you're an operator, the bills you get this year are going to be based on the current numbers that you see in here. So the 539 per point. The CPI adjustments will continue on the cost per point. I did not mention it on the previous slide. They will also continue on the Title V emission fee per ton. That is just what is CPI? inflation.
Consumer price index.
Thank you. Consumer price index adjustment, it's essentially an inflation adjustment to account for inflation. And so we have a whole process that we use to calculate this based on the CPI data. The last bullet is really, we are adding some clarifying language around when we can assess what we're calling additional fees. Basically, this is for situations really where we get what are basically deficient applications or deficient modeling. And historically, we've done a lot of work to fix those and help people fix those, which takes a lot of resources. And so we're kind of clarifying here that we think we've always had the right to do it, but we're clarifying it and codifying that we do have the ability to charge, for instance, 2 modeling reviews if we have to do a number of different modeling reviews based on deficient work on the applicant's part. So that's really what that is, just to alleviate fears that we're just going to start billing more on whims. That's not what that's for. We would do that in limited situations when it is warranted. So one more slide here on 75. Thank you, Eric. So the annual fee for construction permits, that's your new number, 2564, as of January 1st. We're proposing that it go to $2,800. The annual fee, we're proposing a $700 annual fee for notice of intent facilities, again, to help recover some of those ongoing costs for those facilities and not charge those to, say, the GCP Oil and Gas, or just to those people submitting applications or paying annual fees. And then again, some of the same fee payment provisions. We're moving electric, definitely. We really want to reduce paper, as was stated earlier. And we had to update some of the provisions because of the changes we're making to the NOI. So we had to update some of that language about invoicing. And then again, we're going to be putting clearer late fee provisions and administrative compliance costs into this rule so that we could charge late fees for NSR annual fees is really what that's for. In the NSR program, the revenue comes in, the application revenue does come in throughout the fiscal year, but the annual fee revenue for this program usually is due February 28th. We do have some late sometimes in this program, but it's really not a lot. So again, thank you to those of you that are paying them on time. That really helps. So now we're going to put a summary table up, more for informational purposes and quick reference. The current fee is as of the January 1, 2026 CPI adjustment. And just a note that, and this is talked about in the statement of reasons and will be talked about in our testimony. But just so everybody on this call knows, the EIB has not amended our fees since 2009 for the Title V program and 2003 for the construction permit program. And so the only increases that have occurred have been CPI adjustments, which they help, but they deal with inflation. They don't deal with increased complexity, increased workload. So they're not nearly enough. So we are 20 plus years for the construction permit program and, 16 years for the Title V or 17 years. That's a significant amount of time to not have reviewed these and updated these fees. The proposed fee column where the construction permit issues are listed, that is a calculation of if we've added, say, the application review fee for an NOI, you can see that that's 10 points times $585 a point, or $5,850. It's the same points for the GCP Oil and Gas, or sorry, for the GCP 2, 3, and 5. The GCP Oil and Gas calculation in that proposed fee column is the 30 points times the updated cost per point. The cost per point in the annual fee, both annual fees will also increase with the CPI moving forward. That's always happened, obviously, for the NSR fees. We will also do that for the NOI annual fee. We do acknowledge that we know this looks different than last year, and we feel this is a better plan. We feel this spreads out these costs and collects them more equitably from everybody that's contributing to these costs. And just to reiterate again, we do have a 5-year analysis that covers FY 26, which of course we're halfway through fiscal year 2026 already, but we have an analysis that covers FY 26 to FY 30 with projected costs and projected revenues. So we've done a lot of background work here to try and get to this table that you see in front of you. And we feel confident it will cover our costs. And so we've got 2 more slides, which should be easy. So the next slide's timeline. This is your picture of what we've already done and what's coming up. There's a couple of links on here already. So we have a public comment portal with comments to the agency, being us, EPD and CED. There's a separate comment portal where you can comment directly to the board. And so if you want to ensure that a comment go to the board or be on the record, you should use the EIB portal. If you want to talk to us, you can use this comment portal. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to any of the other contacts. You're going to have another contact on the next page. As I said earlier, we're happy to meet with people privately in smaller groups or whatever. We want to answer questions as we can, and we don't want anyone to feel like we're not hearing them. Also, as I mentioned earlier, next Thursday at 6 o'clock Mountain Time, there should already be links out for this and links available on our department calendar. But 6 to 8 p.m., we will have quote unquote virtual office hours where we will do just Q&A. You won't have to go through the whole slideshow again, but you can always watch the video if you want. But it gives you some time to think through this, to look at the rules. And if you feel comfortable and you want to ask questions in a group setting, this is a good chance for that. Again, if you want to ask private questions, we're open for that. There's the date for NOIs. And this is not the air quality permit NOI. This is the notice of intent to provide technical testimony to the EIB or make an official entry of appearance for the hearing, which will occur on March 23rd. Where we can provide you more information on that process, as well as the board's website has information on that process if you are interested in testifying. And the last slide. So right here we have Eric Peters. He's in the room with us here. He's a control strategies manager. So he's another person you can contact. And if you prefer the generic request a meeting, there's the link for that. That's the NMED-wide request a meeting. You'll be asked to say what you want to meet for, and then it'll get routed to me anyway. And so then I'll reach out to you and we'll figure it out. But that concludes what we had to say to you. And so what we want to do first, I think, is I'm going to check in with my moderator and see if we have a lot of questions from the chat already.
We do not.
Okay.
You've done such a wonderful job. We do have one that just came in from Mandy Sackett. Last year, the department mentioned that it receives 8.8 million in fees, and this increase would bring in approximately 35.8 million annually, I believe. Is that still an accurate projection?
So the 35.8 is being pulled from last year's. If we can unmute him if you'd like, he can, but I'm thinking that was in last year's proposal. If I can't answer that off the top of my head, I can tell you that the revenue, the projected revenue across both programs for this year, for this billing cycle we're about to do, is more than 8 million. I can tell you that. The projected costs are above the projected revenue for this year. The 35 million seems maybe a little bit high, but that may be where we end up by 2030 fiscal year. But you're asking questions that are a little bit of detail on the analysis, which we're still finalizing. And part of the reason we're still finalizing that is we're using some state audit data that just came out a few weeks ago to update our, they're not major changes, but we just want to make sure everything is really accurate. But off the top of my head, that seems high for the initial revenue the first year.
Okay. We have another question now. Ooh, here, sorry. Same questioner, Mandy Sackett. Can you describe the public comment opportunity for the March hearing? Will it be each day and for how long?
So we're gonna let Kelsey take that. Kelsey's, our attorney.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kelsey Sona. I'm with Robles, Royal and Anaya, and I'm an attorney for NMED and the Air Quality Bureau for this hearing. The board has not released a pre-hearing order yet, which is typically the document in which public comment is explained and how that works. Generally, what I can tell you is that public comment, when Felicia Orth is the hearing officer, is every day during the hearing. Often she will do it during right after the lunch hour, and then have at least one evening public comment period, so that it's not always during the work hours. And that's if you want to give comment orally, that would be limited to 3 minutes. It is unlimited though to file it in writing. And so you can just submit that in the portal. That's considered public comment to the board in the board's portal, or you can email Pam Jones. And if you look in the docket, that is the link that Mr. Miller put into the chat. In the docket, there's a public notice, and that public notice is long, a little bit dry, but it does go into great detail about how you can participate. And then for how long public comment is, it goes for as long as folks have signed up. So if only 3 people have signed up to give at 1 o'clock, then Ms. Orth will stop it after the 3. She doesn't leave it open for an hour period. So if you wanted to give it, you need to show up at the start with public comments.
And I had Eric go back, that would be the 4th bullet is where you'll find the link directly to the comment portal for EIB. And so if you want to submit a written comment to EIB, that's the portal you would use.
And also the 5th bullet on that slide has a direct link to the public notice that Ms. Sumner just mentioned, with a lot of detailed information about public participation in the process. Okay, I have 2 questions from Rebecca Sobel. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apologies if not. They're kind of long, so bear with me. NMED has stated that current fee revenues are insufficient to fund the direct and indirect costs of administering and enforcing the Title V permit programs, and that permitting actions have increased dramatically, including a 2,100% increase in oil and gas related general construction permits and a 250% increase in NOIs. Given those facts, what is NMED's legal basis for continuing to issue new construction and operating permits today without first ensuring that the department has sufficient resources to monitor compliance and enforce permit conditions as required under the Air Quality Control Act and the Clean Air Act?
I believe that our mandate is to protect air quality. A lot of the obligations that we have are to make sure that the applicants that we get actually do control their emissions to the greatest extent possible. It is also to make sure that they do follow their permits when they're granted, that they follow any regulations that apply to them. The idea that we can simply not issue permits is not something that we can justify. It would cause an extreme upset in the state's economy. It would cause an extreme upset in a lot of the oil and gas operations. And so there are a lot of consequences that we have to consider. And this is a directive that we have from as high up as the governor. You know, we do not have the ability to actually do that.
And I don't think that there's any discretion in the statute to
Mhm.
say, no, we're not gonna grant a permit on that sort of basis. The way the statute and the laws are set out, there's very specific conditions in which, permits can and can't be granted.
And I will also say that, you know, one of our goals is to increase our regional modeling capabilities so that we can start looking at cumulative impacts, because that is what has happened, is that we have a lot of cumulative impacts that were not anticipated at the time that, for example, we promulgated or issued the GCP oil and gas. So again, one of the things that we want to do is to be more protective, and that is one way that we can be more protective. We cannot do it without additional funding. We simply do not have the resources to undertake regional modeling at this point. We want to do it in the future.
Okay, let's move on to Ms. Sobel's second question, which is kind of related to the first. Also long, but not quite as long. NMED has acknowledged that it cannot protect air quality without additional resources, and that fee revenues have declined even as emissions sources and regulatory complexity have increased. What interim safeguards, if any, is NMED implementing to ensure program adequacy and public health protection during the period before revised fees take effect? And did the department consider limiting or conditioning new permits until it can demonstrate adequate staffing, monitoring, and enforcement capacity?
So I want to correct, can you read that again? Because I think there was an incorrect statement.
I'm guessing you're wanting the very beginning, which is NMED has acknowledged that it cannot protect air quality without additional resources. Is that?
So that we did not acknowledge that, but what was the next sentence?
And that fee revenues have declined even as emissions sources and regulatory complexity have increased.
That is Title V specific. Revenue has declined in the Title V program. Revenue has not declined in the construction permit program. So I do want to clarify that. We didn't make a statement like that, and I don't think that's true. I think we are still protecting air quality. That's not to disregard some of the concerns that are happening and some of the air deterioration that has happened, but I don't think we've made any statement that we cannot protect air quality without these fees.
We can do a better job if we can get adequate staffing, if we can get adequate resources that would include technology and that type of thing. There's always room for improvement. We recognize that. We have done a lot of things, I think, that are protective of air quality. The promulgation of Part 50, the ozone precursor rule, that started to bring in a lot of facilities that had been totally unregulated before. Are we adequately enforcing that particular rule? We are working at that. When we do inspections, we certainly include that. We include that rule when we have permits. When we do investigations, we understand that they may also fall under that rule. And so we look at those types of things. We request information from facilities when we get some information that there may be a problem. So, you know, it's better than not having the rule at all. It's not perfect. We are working towards making it perfect. I don't think anybody can ever say that it will be perfect, but, you know, we are taking strides. We are making progress, and it actually shows in, you know, more recent, data from air monitoring. And we also, you know, we're in the process of getting a mobile lab going. That will be able to be deployed. And so if there is a particular concern, we may be able to have better data to show what the problem really is. So again, I would confirm what Brian just said is, you know, it's not true that we're not protecting air quality. We are. Can we do it better with more resources? Absolutely.
Okay, I do have one more question in the chat, but before we get to that, I want to check in with Ms. Montoya or maybe Mr. Peters, whichever's hosting the meeting, just to see if we have anybody on the platform that has their hand raised that might want to come off mute and actually ask a question.
At the moment, there's no one with their hands raised, but feel free to do that.
Okay, great. So we'll continue with the chat then, and it's a good reminder that you can, in addition to putting questions in the chat, you can also raise your hand and just voice your question if you prefer to do it that way. So this question, this is from Ms. Sackett again, and I should have mentioned previously, Ms. Sackett is with Earthworks. Can you describe the potential benefits to communities? That is, even if you stopped permitting new oil and gas today, you would still have to monitor and enforce air quality standards. How will this fee increase benefit local communities that live amongst existing permits and operations?
In my view, one of the biggest gains is that we will be able to more thoroughly enforce permits that exist. This is one of the goals that we have is to fairly significantly increase our compliance and enforcement staff. And the reason is that we know that more is needed for this number of facilities that we have under our authority to regulate. So that, I think, is going to be the main benefit. We have also started what we're calling a permit verification program, and this is something that we have already started. I would envision that we could expand that. And one of the things that we do is when we get a new permit or a permit modification, we're sending people out to some of those facilities and saying, are you operating or did you construct exactly the way that you put in your permit? Because that has been an issue in the past. So, you know, again, those are benefits to communities that live near these types of facilities. One of the other things we want to do is to expand our monitoring capabilities so that if we start seeing that there are additional air quality problems in a particular area, then we'll need to start doing an analysis of what's causing that. Is somebody violating their permit? Does somebody not have the appropriate controls that they need to have, and that type of thing? So all of those things together, I think will be a benefit for communities.
That was a great answer, and as you spoke, I wanted to make sure we clearly explained to everybody that, and this goes back to the fees cover more than permitting. We have spun off the C&E division, and our air compliance and enforcement folks are moving into a new division. They will be funded by these fees. And so I just want to make sure that I meant to say it earlier, and I don't think it got clearly stated that, while they will move to a new division, they will be funded from our SRS, from our permit fees and our emission fees.
Okay, yeah, that was fantastic. Ms. Sackett added that she was looking for more specifics on improved monitoring and compliance, which is, I think, exactly what you talked about. Is there any more you could say about potential expansion of monitoring with more resources, with higher fees?
So, yes, so we have had our IT folks, our GIS specialists actually do sort of an analysis. And, you know, New Mexico is the 5th largest state geographically in the nation. And, there's a lot of area to cover. Not all of the areas have industry that we need to worry about. But there is a lot of area between, for example, monitors in the Permian Basin. One of our goals right now, and we are starting to work on that, is to include more monitoring in the Permian Basin. It's kind of an odd situation because sometimes industry will say, ooh, well, we don't want that. But really, industry should want that because when we're looking at future possibility of getting a non-attainment designation, one of the things that we can do if we have the data is to use the data that we have to say, oh, this non-attainment area should only be this much, not the entire county or something like that. If the data show that. If the data don't show that, then that's a different story. But that's one of our plans, is to increase our monitoring network so that we have more granular data for that spatial coverage. One of the big areas that we're looking at first is the Permian Basin, partially because of the ozone issues that we are experiencing there. We are seeing some improvements, I think, as a result of Part 50. And so we do also applaud those companies that have invested in compliance for Part 50. I do think it's making a difference. That said, we also recognize that we do need more monitoring in the Permian Basin specifically, and probably in some other areas of the state as well.
And to tie that, that's great answer, to tie it back to the fees. I think, because that's what we're here to talk about, this increased monitoring would likely be 100% funded by the state. It gives us more freedom. We don't have to navigate all of the EPA requirements. We can make decisions on our own monitors if we're funding it from our own funds. And so I do think that's what we're hoping to do.
I think we're looking at a little bit of both.
Well, we would, but I'm trying to point out that this
Right.
would give us the freedom and the ability to make our own decisions if we can't get the feds to guide us.
Right, and the other part of that is that it is a very long process to get monitors into the EPA approved network. Very long process. It takes a lot of work on collaborations and agreements, approvals from EPA, agreements to use particular properties because there are very strict siting requirements and that type of thing. We still want to do that because we think that the Permian Basin warrants that. At the same time, there is nothing to stop us putting a monitoring station in a place like Artesia or Maljamar. I mean, I'm throwing some things out, but these are some of the requests that we have had. We're concerned about this area around Artesia. Okay, we're concerned about this area around Lovington. Those are some of the requests that we are getting. And while we can send, once it's completely up and running, while we can send a mobile monitoring trailer as a setup for a temporary monitoring, for more permanent understanding of what's going on in various areas, we need to add more monitors. And we are looking at doing that both within the EPA network, getting their approval, but even before that, we should be able to place some monitors in other areas just on our own that will inform us, but not be a part of the EPA overall program.
One of the pieces that you had mentioned about monitoring was that a lot of the grant money that the program receives comes for monitoring. and that there's been some changes in grant funding potentially, or maybe in the outlooks, as well as there's a matching requirement for grant
Mhm.
funding. Do you want to speak a little bit about how that works together with this?
So while the program costs have to be covered with the revenue fees that we've just been talking about, we can reduce our costs by federal grants. And the federal grant that we apply for every year is called a 105 grant. And what that typically does is we put in a request for a particular budget on the grant that covers all of our monitoring and all of our quality assurance work that goes along with making sure that that monitoring data are correct and that type of thing. This year, it hasn't quite covered all of those people. And like you said, it's a 60% grant. So if we have a budget of, let's say, 1 million for all of the monitoring work, the grant would award us 600,000, and the state has to put in 400,000. So it really is a 60-40, and like you said, it's a match. If we get 60%, let me say that differently. If we get 600,000, we have to put in 400,000. The changes that have happened in the federal government, while we haven't seen, we had a slight cut this year. The outlook is that there's a possibility of going back to previous levels this coming year. That's all to be seen. We don't know that yet. There are more requirements. We have to adjust the wording in our application to make sure that we're not running afoul of things like equity and inclusion and environmental justice and those types of things. That is something that, you know, we feel is really important, is to make sure that communities are taken care of. But we cannot use certain words, and we have to change the way that we submit those applications. So that's one of the things that I was referring to.
Some more questions in the chat, Ken?
No, we don't have no new questions have come in. Maybe we could check with Eric again and see if anybody has got their hand up to ask a question.
I don't see any hands.
We want to contemplate potentially a 5-minute break. It's 5:30, just for your
Well,
awareness.
I mean, I think that we can probably contemplate adjourning maybe because, you know.
No, we can stay here, and if anybody does have a question, go ahead and either put it in the chat or raise your hand. And we will attempt to answer it. Again, you know, this is a lot of information, we understand. And some people might be seeing this kind of thing for the first time. You may not have had the bandwidth or the awareness to go and look at documents that have already been filed. So hopefully with this information available to you, you can go and find everything that's on the docket so far. You can look at this slide deck. Again, it's already posted. You can look at the recording once we post that, and then kind of mull it over a little bit, and that may inspire some questions later on, and that's what next Thursday's meeting will be about. But in the meantime, you may be able to think, just sit and think about things for a minute, and something will come to you. Don't hesitate to put that in the chat or raise your hand to ask that question.
We have another question.
Oh, good.
First of all, Ms. Sackett, so thank you. This is from Chuck, no affiliation. I'm unfamiliar with the New Mexico Environmental Improvement Board process. If the fee increases are approved by the EIB and implemented into state statute, what is the timeline for when the new fee structure would apply to application filings?
So the board does not adopt statute. So that, I'm sure that's just an oversight, but that's not what the board does. They would adopt a rule, an NMAC rule. That's what we're proposing to change. If they adopt them, there's a process that happens after that leads to an effective date. There is did we put an effect? I totally forgot. We did put one, right? We didn't put XXX. So there's an effective date in our red line,
June 1, 2026.
June 1. So the board could theoretically change that too, but whatever that effective date ends up being, that's when these rules, these replacement rules become effective. So for the purposes of what you're asking, the Title V situation is easy, and if the rules get delayed a little bit, it won't make a difference because we only charge on allowable tons, and we only do that once a year in March. And so this rule will not be done in time for that to happen this year. So as I was stating earlier, all bills other than application reviews, and I'll come back to that in a second, but all of your annual fee bills are going to be billed under the existing structure. So for Title V, if it were to get adopted on June 1, next, the bills that go out in 2027 would reflect the updated fee structure. For the construction permit program, it's the same story for your annual fees because those bills go out, they're actually going to go out soon. With a due date of February 28th, they will obviously, the ones that are going out soon will go out with the current structure. So under that scenario, effective June 1st, next January, your NSR annual fee, your NOI annual fees would be reflected under the new rule next January. For application reviews, those would become effective immediately. So we would,
As of the effective date.
right, as of the effective date, the cost per point would go to the new baseline. Right? We actually didn't talk about that, but I think it would go to the new baseline, but the points would go up immediately. So your NOI application review points would go to 10, your GCP oil and gas application points would go to 30 immediately. Your modeling reviews would go, that only is going to apply, that doesn't apply for GCPs, but if you're having to do modeling, that fee will go from 15 to 30 right away. So if you're familiar with the invoicing process, Chuck, right, was his name? So if you're familiar with it, when you submit an application, the permitting section does their stuff, and then you get an invoice that says, here's what this application is going to cost. Those application invoices will get updated immediately after the effective date.
All right, terrific. Ms. Sackett from Earthworks has another question. Is there a deadline that you'd like to receive written comments for the EIB record? And this might be a good time to talk a little bit again or remind about the difference between comments to the board and us and the different maybe deadline or timeline for that.
So before I say that, and this is a question to those in the room, that's also on the portal, right? Doesn't it have the deadlines? For the board, it's prior to the hearing, prior to the start of the hearing, right?
So, do you want me to give it a little answer?
Go for it.
Sure.
So, there's a common practice in the way kind of the EIB tends to operate. As this team mentioned, there's two portals for public comment. One is the NMED portal that's pushing those comments to the staff here in this room. And then there's an Environmental Improvement Board portal that's pushing the comments to the Environmental Improvement Board members for the record of the rulemaking. What NMED does with the comments that it receives throughout the process is it's reviewing them, considering them, and its evaluation and responses to those comments get included when NMED files its notice of intent to file technical testimony. And so you will see within that testimony, the responses to public comment and, summaries of the public engagement, summaries of this meeting, those types of things. So if you want NMED to consider your comment, you want to get it in by the NOI deadline, which is 30 days before the hearing,
February 20th.
February 20th. If you want it for the board to consider, those can be submitted all the way through the close of the record. The close of the record is a little bit of an amorphous time because it happens by decision of the hearing officer. Once the board has heard all evidence and testimony during the hearing dates in March, she will officially close the record, and then the board will take the next steps to go to deliberations. So your best bet is to get it in before the end of the day on the second day, would be my rough guess, if you were sending it to the board. So Mandy, hopefully that helps you with the two processes.
Okay, Chuck says, thank you, that was helpful explanation. Nothing new's come in. Eric, anybody have their hand up?
I don't see any hands.
Okay,
We'll wait.
we shall wait. Okay, we're back. We have another question that's come in. This is from Antoinette Reyes. How many public comment opportunities are available?
So infinite? So if you're talking about the formal process, then that goes back to what Kelsey was sharing about the portals that we have, one to direct your comments to us, one to direct your comments to the board. But I say infinite because we're here, I'm here, you want to ask me a question, ask me a question. So it's not clear if that's referring to official commenting. Like I said, if it is, then you have these two separate pathways. And to Kelsey's point, if, you know, if you, it would be best for us, if you want us to think about it to get it, you know, a week or two in advance of the 20th, so we can actually think about it before we respond to our, or before we submit our NOI. You can comment after that. It's just that it gets a little more difficult for us to incorporate that into our actual, hearing. EIB up until the second day of the hearing, I think you said, end of the second day.
Yeah, so it depends on when they officially close the record. Usually every day that, so the rules and the notice say that every day that the board holds the hearing before deliberations begin, there must be a public comment opportunity. And so, typically the way that those are scheduled are 1 o'clock each day. And for a multi-day hearing, the hearing officer tries to have one in the evening, if you want to give oral public comment. Some people have a preference for doing that. She typically limits it to 3 minutes. And you can go in person to the hearing, you can appear via WebEx and give that. So I would say 2 to 3, maybe 4 oral public comment opportunities for the hearing. Like I said, though, that decision comes from the hearing officer, and we don't have one of those yet. And then unlimited, as Brian said, to NMED. I would also add that if you have questions about environmental improvement processes, the board administrator, Pam Jones, is really great. And she helps facilitate all of those interactions with the public. And so she is a good resource as well to ask about how you can participate.
So we've got about 12 minutes, not 11 minutes left, and so last chances to send us your comments or raise your hand.
Thank you, everyone, for participating in this meeting. We hope that the information we have presented has been helpful. We do understand that there may be more questions later. We hope that people that have substantive comments will certainly contact us using the contact information that is in the slideshow. And if you want to present comments to the board, use the contact information that's also in the slideshow. We appreciate your participation on behalf of all NMED. We do believe that this is an important process, and we do take it seriously. So please know that we are open to contact and comments. Thank you very much.